We've all seen the usual picture of Greenland, a single, solid island, a giant white cap, an interior that's basically nothing but ice. But older maps kept insisting on something else. They didn't just draw coastlines wrong, they drew a Greenland with an inside. And not just mountains, they drew passages. Think about how much a shortcut would matter up there. Going around Greenland means dealing with brutal coastlines, shifting pack ice, storms, and the kind of cold that turns mistakes into death. A route that cuts through, even partially, even seasonally, would save time, save supplies, and save lives. That's why sailors and mapmakers would obsess over it. Not because it's romantic, because it's useful. And usefulness is the strongest reason something ends up on a map. Let me show you what I mean by passage, because it's not just one random drawing. Some maps show a long cut that looks like a straight, almost like you could sail into Greenland from one side and come out the other. Other maps show two cuts, like the island was split into sections with routes between them. Sometimes the cuts are labeled like they matter, not "here be monsters," not decorative flourishes, just practical map language, lines, labels, and the kind of confidence that suggests the cartographer believed this information came from somewhere. And yes, cartographers could be wrong, but wrong in the same direction for centuries is a different kind of wrong. Long corridors cutting across the island, east to west. Like Greenland was never meant to be one locked, silent block, but a place you could cross, navigate, even pass through. That idea sounds ridiculous today because modern maps train your brain to stop at the coastline. The center is treated like a blank screen. Here's another reason this stays sticky in your mind. The blank isn't neutral. When a map shows detail, it invites questions. When a map shows blankness, it shuts questions down before they form. So even if the blank is just a design choice, it still has a real effect. It turns Greenland's interior into a mental dead zone. And dead zones are where inconvenient history goes to sleep. This is why the passage story feels different from the simple blank map story. A blank map is a presentation issue. A passage is a claim about how the world worked. A passage means movement, trade, contact, routes, seasons. People who tried, failed, and tried again. And if that passage ever mattered, then Greenland wasn't just a dead white mass in the human imagination. It was part of the network. So I'm going to frame this as one simple mystery. Why do so many old sources behave like Greenland had a route through it? And why does the modern story make that route feel impossible? If you follow old world research, you already know how this goes. You don't need one perfect smoking gun. You just need a repeating mismatch, something that shows up again and again across time, across different documents, while the modern story quietly asks you not to look too closely. Okay, assume it's all normal. Assume it's all errors and imagination. Then explain three things at once. First, why do multiple maps from different countries and decades keep drawing the same kind of interior passage concept? Sometimes one, sometimes two. Like a tradition that won't die. Second, why do those maps sometimes add practical-sounding notes like previously navigable, now closed by ice, instead of mythical language? Third, why do modern default maps make the interior feel visually empty, even though we have the tools to reveal bedrock shape under ice? Separately, you can dismiss each point. Together, it starts to look like a story that got frozen over. At one point, I started doing the most basic thing you can do in an investigation like this. I pulled a handful of old Greenland maps and put them in a folder like evidence photos. I didn't care if the coastlines were off. I only cared about one thing. Do they keep drawing the same kind of internal corridor? And the answer was yes, often enough that it stopped feeling random. Then I noticed something even weirder. The older the map, the more confident it seems about the interior. As you get closer to the modern era, the interior gets quieter, like the maps are slowly backing away from making claims they can't support anymore. And then modern maps do the final move. They turn the interior into blank white, so you don't even think to ask. Let's start with what the old maps actually show. If you've never looked, it's almost shocking. In a lot of early modern cartography, 15s through 17s, Greenland isn't portrayed as a featureless dome. It's drawn with interior relief, ridges, valleys, and in some cases, long, straight-ish lines that resemble channels or straits. Now, these aren't modern satellite-accurate drawings, obviously. Cartographers in that era were working with incomplete information, sailor reports, copied charts, and political bias. But here's the detail that keeps bothering me. When old maps are wrong, they're usually wrong in chaotic ways. Coastlines drift. Islands appear out of nowhere. Shapes get stretched. What you don't usually get is the same idea repeating across centuries. A cross-island passage, an interior corridor, a route that looks usable. That kind of repetition feels like inherited knowledge, like a rumor that had enough weight to be drawn, copied, and printed. And then you hit the phrase that changes the tone. Previously navigable, now closed by ice. That's not a fairy tale sentence. That's a navigation sentence. That's what someone writes when a route used to be possible within the human timeline, and then stopped. And here's the retention question I want you to hold in your head as we continue. If Greenland's interior was always just ice forever, why did the old world keep trying to describe it? Why not leave it blank back then? Why not admit unknown? Why fill it with roots, ridges, and practical notes? That is the uncomfortable part. Old maps wanted the interior to be a place. Modern defaults want the interior to be a blank. So the first big question is not, were the maps perfect? It's, why were people even thinking in terms of routes through Greenland at all? Because in the modern imagination, Greenland is a locked door. You don't pass through it. You go around. The old maps sometimes treat it like a hallway. And the deeper you go into old reports, the more you find a consistent vibe. People didn't always talk about Greenland like it was a sealed alien world. They talked about seasons. They talked about routes. They talked about openings, pack ice, passages, and coastal conditions that could change within a lifetime. That's the kind of language you use when a place is harsh, but still part of human navigation, not when it's an eternal frozen wall. Now let's connect this to a real human story. The Norse. We know people lived on Greenland's coast. We know the Norse arrived around 1,000 years ago. They built farms. They raised animals. They stayed for centuries. Then those settlements fade out by the late 1400s. Mainstream explanations are a mix. Trade collapse, isolation, conflict, economic pressure, cooling climate. All of that can be true. But here's the question that fits the old map vibe. What if Greenland didn't just get harder slowly? What if routes closed faster than we're comfortable admitting? This is the part where people usually say, but glaciers move slowly. Sometimes they do, but history is full of fast changes in access. A single decade of harsher winters can kill a route. A few decades of stronger pack ice can erase a corridor from practical memory. And once a corridor stops being used, it stops being mapped. Once it stops being mapped, it stops being believed. That's how you get a soft reset. not by deleting files, but by making something unreachable until it becomes never existed. Because when routes close, history changes without needing a war. Trade dies, navigation becomes lethal, communication collapses, communities disappear from the record. And the thing that makes Greenland perfect for reset thinking is this. And if you want the Tartaria connection without forcing it, here it is. Tartaria stories aren't only about one place. They're about how official reality is maintained. Sometimes it's maintained by renaming, sometimes by filing evidence into archives, and sometimes by making the evidence physically inaccessible long enough that the story can be rebuilt on top of the silence. Greenland is the perfect laboratory for that, because ice is a natural archive lock. Ice is the ultimate eraser, and it doesn't have to be intentional to rewrite the story. And this isn't just theory about ice hiding things. We've already seen real examples of how fast ice can swallow the human world. In the last century alone, people built structures in Greenland that later got buried, reduced to weird shapes under snow, then rediscovered as the ice shifted. If a modern facility can become a frozen time capsule within a human lifetime, imagine what a few centuries can do to older traces. Ice doesn't only cover, it preserves, distorts, and delays the moment when questions become obvious. It can bury evidence. It can lock archaeology behind kilometers of frozen weight, and it can keep a place so inaccessible that the modern world treats it like a blank. That brings us to the modern era, where this gets weird in a different way. We live in the age of satellites. The age of everything is mapped. And yet, in most default map views, Greenland's interior is still presented as white nothing. The coastline looks detailed, sharp, believable. The center looks like a screensaver. And here's something else that makes this feel too clean. If you search for older Greenland maps, you'll notice a shift over time. Earlier maps tend to invent an interior. They add mountains, ridges, roots, sometimes wildly. Later maps start to go quiet. The interior gets less confident. Then modern maps go silent entirely, blank white. It's like the interior moved through 3 phases. 1, described. 2, debated. 3, removed from the public imagination. That sequence is the whole story. This is where people get stuck, because they hear a simple answer. It's ice. Yes, but ice doesn't mean no terrain. Under the ice, there is a real landscape, ridges, basins, valleys, massive geological structure. Modern science has mapped it with radar surveys. The data exists. Here's a modern detail that almost nobody connects to the old map passage obsession. Scientists have reported huge features under the Greenland ice, giant valleys and canyon-like structures in the bedrock. Not tiny grooves, massive shapes that prove the interior is not flat, not simple, not nothing. So when an old map draws an interior corridor, it doesn't have to mean a river you could cruise like the Mississippi. It could mean a depression, a pathway, a natural line that makes travel make sense when conditions are right. And if conditions change, the same feature becomes irrelevant, until the melt makes it relevant again. So the modern question becomes incredibly simple. If the interior has real shape, why is the default public view so visually empty? You can call it simplification. You can call it product design. But here's the catch. Default creates belief. Default teaches your brain what's real. Here's a quick map trick that makes this more personal. Search for an old map that shows a passage. Then, without changing anything else, open a modern map and zoom toward the same region. Watch what happens to your brain. On the old map, your eyes follow the line like a route. On the modern map, your eyes hit the blank and stop. It's not just data, it's storytelling. A place shown in detail feels like a place. A place shown as blank feels like a non-place. And that's how big questions die, without anyone banning them. No censorship needed. Just a design choice that turns the interior into mental fog. Now let's go back to the passage idea, because this is where the story becomes a new kind of chase. If there really was ever a corridor, an easier route, a depression, a channel, then we'd expect modern radar maps of the bedrock to show something, even if the surface is sealed. And interestingly, when you look into modern sub-ice mapping projects, you do find large-scale features, huge basins, deep valleys, long troughs. Let's make this extremely practical. If you were a navigator centuries ago, you didn't need the interior to be comfortable. You just needed it to be predictable. A corridor that's open only in certain months is still a corridor. A route that's risky but known is still a route. But once ice conditions become unpredictable, once storms and pack ice shift faster than your knowledge, routes die. And when routes die, maps get rewritten to match the new reality. I'm not saying this proves the old maps. I'm saying Greenland has an interior. It has structure. So the old cartographic obsession with routes may not be as crazy as it sounds. It could be the memory of a landscape that was more open at the edges. Or it could be older navigation tradition, routes around ice conditions that changed over time. Or it could be something more interesting, a corridor that was once considered possible during certain seasons, then closed. Now, there's another detail that makes this feel less like fantasy and more like logistics. Old maps don't just draw the corridor. Some draw it differently. One passage, two passages, shifted north or south. That's not what you get when everyone copies a single mistake. That's what you get when a tradition exists, but the details are debated, like multiple sources describing something similar from different angles. Now bring in the 1800s, because this is where modern exploration starts writing over older ideas. In the late 1800s, one of the first famous crossings of Greenland's ice cap was done by Fridtjof Nansen. It's treated like a heroic first, which it is. But what most people don't notice is that exploration plans are influenced by maps. If a map suggests a natural corridor, explorers tend to aim for it. And when reality doesn't match the map, they either call the map wrong or they quietly move on and the old idea dies. That's how knowledge gets reset in practice. Now you might be thinking, okay, even if a passage existed, why would it disappear from the story? Because the story follows usefulness. When a route is useful, it gets talked about. When it becomes dangerous, it becomes a rumor. When it becomes impossible, it becomes a myth. And when it becomes a myth, modern people treat it like it was always a myth. That's the quietest kind of rewrite. No meeting required. Not by dramatic suppression, by one generation of people saying, that doesn't work, and the next generation never trying again. Now, Greenland returns to headlines for a different reason. Melt. And I want to make something clear, because people always misunderstand this genre. This isn't climate denial, and it isn't climate propaganda. It's a different question. Climate tells you what is happening. This video asks what history might look like once the ice stops hiding it. Because ice doesn't care about the timeline in textbooks. Ice doesn't care about what we agree happened. Ice is just a lock, and locks eventually break. So if you're here for the old world angle, this is why Greenland is so valuable. It's one of the few places where the past is literally sealed, and now the seal is weakening. Every year, the edge retreats. More rock appears, new terrain is exposed, and most media coverage focuses on the consequences: sea level rise, climate systems, ecosystems. Now, I want to be honest, none of this proves a secret civilization under Greenland. That's not the claim. The claim is smaller and more dangerous. We may be underestimating how recently the North became sealed. And if we underestimate that, we misunderstand everything built on top of it. Navigation history, settlement history, even what old maps were trying to preserve. That's why this topic matters. All real. But here's the old world twist. Melt doesn't only reveal the future, it reveals the past. And if you want this to be a real investigation, you don't look for fantasy. You look for small, repeatable anomalies that shouldn't exist if the story is as clean as the default view makes it feel. Not giant cities. Simple things, straight lines that don't match natural fracture patterns, repeated right angles, stonework-like textures where everything should be random, unnatural drainage channels that look guided, old roadbeds near newly exposed edges. The point is not to prove a conclusion today. The point is to set a watch list, because Greenland is one of the few mysteries where time is actively opening the evidence for us. The ice is pulling back, whether anyone likes it or not. And once millions of people start watching the reveal, the interior stops being blank. It becomes a live investigation. So here's the new story. The one that isn't just Greenland is blank. It's this. Greenland may have been treated, in older knowledge, as a place with roots, passages, corridors, or at least navigable logic. Then conditions hardened, ice advanced, access collapsed. The interior became unreachable, then unknowable. Modern maps turned that unknowable into a visual blank. And now the ice is retreating again. If nothing unusual appears, that's still an answer. But if consistent anomalies begin showing up, patterns that rhyme with old depictions, then Greenland becomes the most dramatic example of history under a layer on Earth. And that's why this is in the Tartaria lane, because this niche isn't really about one empire. It's about the idea that recent history is less stable than we're taught, that geography can be rewritten by access, that a place can go from mapped and talked about to blank and ignored, simply because conditions changed and the story adapted. So, after this video, do one thing. Pull up an old Greenland map that shows an interior passage. Then pull up a modern default map view that shows the interior as empty. Put them side by side. You don't need to believe anything. Just notice the direction of the change. Old maps tried to fill the interior with information. Modern maps remove the interior from your attention. That's backwards, and backward changes are where the best mysteries live. So here's my challenge to you. When you hear old maps were wrong, don't accept it as a magic spell that ends the conversation. Ask, wrong in what way? Random wrong, or wrong in a repeating, structured way that suggests an older tradition underneath? Because a repeating wrong can be a shadow of a real thing. And Greenland is full of shadows right now, physical shadows under ice, and narrative shadows in how the story is told. That's why I think the lost passage is the better mystery. The blank map is the symptom. The passage is the question. Because Greenland isn't just melting. And if you want the cleanest way to follow this over time, do this. Save one old map image that shows an interior corridor. Then, every few months, check the newest exposed edge imagery. Coastline retreats, new rock surfaces, new valleys. You're not looking for a wow moment. You're looking for consistency. Because the day Greenland's interior stops being blank in people's minds, the whole conversation changes. And at that point, the old maps won't feel like antiques. They'll feel like witnesses. It's reopening.